We were just a group of teenagers looking for some fun on a warm summer night. So, we decided to go skinny dipping in the lake, thinking it would be a thrilling adventure under the cover of darkness. Little did we know, it would turn into a nightmare we'd never forget. The lake looked calm and inviting as we made our way down to the water's edge, the moonlight casting an eerie glow on its surface. We laughed and joked as we stripped down and waded into the cool, refreshing water, unaware of the danger lurking beneath. Then, without warning, one of my friends disappeared beneath the surface with a loud splash, thrashing and struggling as if something had grabbed hold of them. We all froze in horror, our hearts pounding in our chests as we searched frantically for any sign of them. But no matter how hard we looked, there was no trace of our friend, just the dark, murky water stretching out in every direction. Panic set in as we realized that they were gone, swallowed up by the lake without a trace. We knew we had to get out of there, to find help before it was too late. But as we made our way towards the shore, a sense of dread washed over us like a tidal wave. It was like the lake itself had come alive, the water churning and roiling as if something was lurking just beneath the surface. I could feel ice watching us from the darkness, filled with a hunger that sent a chill down my spine. We stumbled and fell as we scrambled onto the shore, our breath coming in ragged gasps as we tried to put some distance between ourselves and the lake. But no matter how fast we ran, it felt like the darkness was closing in around us, like we were being hunted by some unseen predator. As we reached the safety of the shore, we turned back to look at the lake, half expecting to see something emerging from its depths. But all we saw was the still, silent water, like nothing had ever happened. We knew we had to get help, to tell someone what had happened before it was too late. But as we made our way back to town, a sense of dread settled over us like a dark cloud. It was like we were being watched, like something was following us from the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And no matter how hard we tried to shake the feeling, we couldn't escape the sense of unease that lingered in the air. When we finally made it back to town, we told the local police what had happened, but they dismissed our story as nothing more than a prank gone wrong. They said there was no evidence of foul play, no sign of our missing friend, and said we was making it up, but in their eyes it was like they knew the truth. When we got home, we reported a missing persons case, and to this day, they have never been found. We were out on the lake, just me and my son, enjoying a quiet day of fishing like we always did. It was our favorite spot, a peaceful retreat from the hustle and bustle of everyday life. But little did we know, our day of relaxation would soon turn into a nightmare. As we cast our lines into the water, the sun shining down on us, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It was like there was a heaviness in the air, a sense of unease that settled over me like a dark cloud. But I pushed the feeling aside, telling myself it was just my imagination running wild. After all, we were just here to have a good time, to bond over our shared love of fishing. But then, as we reeled in our catch, something caught on the line, something heavy and solid. At first, I thought it was just a big fish, maybe a bass or a trout. But as we pulled it closer, my heart sank like a stone. Tangled in the fishing line was a human hand, pale and lifeless, the fingers curled like they were reaching out for help. I felt bile rise in my throat as I realized what we had stumbled upon, a gruesome piece of evidence in a recent murder. My son's eyes widened in horror as he stared at the hand, his face pale and drawn. I could see the fear and confusion in his eyes, the realization sinking in that we were in way over our heads. I tried to stay calm, to reassure him that everything would be okay, but deep down, I knew that we were in serious trouble. We needed to get out of there, to find help before whoever had left that hand behind came back for us. But as we made our way back to shore, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, like someone or something was lurking in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. We reached the safety of land and wasted no time in contacting the authorities, telling them what we had found out on the lake. They arrived quickly, their faces grim and determined as they examined the scene. But as they searched the area for more evidence, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being targeted, that whoever had left that hand behind was still out there, waiting to finish what they had started. Days turned into weeks, and the investigation into the murder dragged on with no leads and no suspects. I don't know if they will ever find out who done it, but one thing is for sure, I won't sleep properly until they do. We were a group of friends out on the lake to celebrate a birthday. It was a warm summer night, the stars twinkling overhead as we cruised along in our boat, laughing and joking as we enjoyed each other's company. But little did we know, our night of celebration was about to take a terrifying turn. As we reached the middle of the lake, our boat suddenly sputtered and died, leaving us stranded in the darkness. Panic set in as we realized that we were adrift in the middle of the water, with no way to call for help. We tried to remain calm, to assess the situation and come up with a plan, but our nerves were frayed and our minds were racing with fear. And then, out of the darkness, we saw them, two men in another boat, slowly approaching us with sinister intent. My heart sank as I realized that we were not alone out here on the lake, that there were others out there who meant us harm. I could see the fear reflected in my friends' eyes as they huddled together, clutching each other tightly as the men drew closer. We tried to call out to them, to ask for help, but they ignored our cries, their faces hidden in the shadows as they continued to advance towards us. I could feel a cold sweat breaking out on my skin as I watched them, my mind racing with terror at the thought of what they might do to us. And then, without warning, they were upon us, their boat bumping up against ours with a force that sent us stumbling backwards. I could see the glint of malice in their eyes as they leered at us, their intentions clear even in the darkness. We knew that we had to get out of there, to find a way to escape before it was too late. But as we scrambled to start the engine and get away, I could feel a sense of dread settling over me like a heavy weight. I could hear my friends shouting, their voices filled with fear and desperation as they tried to fend off our attackers. But it was no use, we were outnumbered and outmatched, our only hope for survival slipping away with each passing moment. And then, just when it seemed like all hope was lost, I saw it, a glimmer of light in the distance, like a beacon of salvation in the darkness. It was another boat, coming to our rescue just when we needed it most. With a surge of adrenaline, we made a run for it, jumping into the water and swimming towards the approaching boat with all the strength we had left. I could feel the icy water closing in around me, threatening to drag me down into its depths, but I pushed on, fueled by the desperate need to escape. And then, finally, we were safe, pulled aboard the rescue boat by our saviors and whisked away from the nightmare that had unfolded on the lake. As we looked back at the two men fading into the darkness, we all felt lucky to be alive. We were so excited when we found the listing for the secluded lake cabin online. It seemed like the perfect getaway, a chance to escape the hustle and bustle of the city and spend some quality time together in the great outdoors. Little did we know, our romantic weekend would soon turn into a nightmare beyond our wildest imaginations. As we arrived at the cabin, we were immediately struck by its rustic charm. Nestled among the trees, with a stunning view of the lake, it was everything we had hoped for and more. We couldn't wait to explore the surrounding woods and take in the natural beauty of our surroundings. But as we set out on our hike, our excitement quickly turned to unease. The woods felt eerily quiet, with not a bird chirping or a rustle of leaves to break the silence. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. As we ventured deeper into the woods, we stumbled upon a clearing, where we came face to face with a sight that chilled us to the bone, a makeshift altar, adorned with bloody sacrifices. My heart hammered in my chest as I realized that we had stumbled upon something dark and sinister, something that should never have been disturbed. We tried to turn and run, to get as far away from the altar as possible, but it was already too late. We heard the sound of footsteps behind us, growing louder and more insistent with each passing moment. We were being hunted, and there was nowhere to hide. Panic set in as we realized that we were completely at the mercy of our pursuers. We could hear them closing in on us, their voices low and menacing as they whispered threats and promises of unspeakable horrors. We ran as fast as we could, our hearts pounding in our chests as we pushed ourselves to the brink of exhaustion. But no matter how hard we tried, we couldn't seem to shake our pursuers, couldn't seem to escape from the nightmare that had engulfed us. As we stumbled through the dense underbrush, we could feel the eyes of our hunters boring into us, their presence a constant, oppressive weight on our minds. We knew that we had to find a way to escape, to get out of the woods and back to safety before it was too late. But just when it seemed like all hope was lost, we stumbled upon a small stream, its crystal clear waters shimmering in the dappled sunlight. With a surge of adrenaline, we plunged into the icy depths, desperate to put as much distance between ourselves and our pursuers as possible. We swam for what felt like hours, our muscles burning with exertion as we fought against the current. But eventually, we reached the other side of the stream, collapsing onto the muddy bank in a tangle of limbs and gasping for breath. As we lay there, trying to catch our breath and gather our wits, we realized that we were safe, at least for the moment. But we knew that we couldn't stay here forever, that we had to find a way to get help and put an end to the nightmare that had consumed us. With trembling hands, we pulled ourselves to our feet and set off into the woods once more, determined to find our way back to civilization and put an end to the terror that had befallen us. And as we stumbled through the darkness, we managed to escape to a main road and flag down a passing car. Once we reached the safety of a town, we reported it to the local police, but it was like they had an agreement with the cult. They told us if we made it out alive, we were better off forgetting it and to leave it alone. We decided to go on a camping trip by the lake. It was supposed to be a chance for our family to bond and reconnect with nature. We packed up our gear, loaded the car, and headed out to the remote campground. Once we arrived, we set up our tents near the edge of the woods. The air was crisp, and the scent of pine surrounded us. It felt good to be away from the hustle and bustle of city life. As the sun began to set, we gathered around the campfire, roasting marshmallows and telling stories. The crackling flames cast eerie shadows on the trees, but we felt safe in each other's company. After dinner, the kids begged to play hide and seek. We agreed, thinking it would be a fun way to tire them out before bed. My youngest, Emily, insisted on being the seeker first. We counted to 10 while Emily ran off to hide. The woods were dark now, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. But I brushed it off as my imagination running wild in the wilderness. As we searched for Emily, the woods seemed to swallow her up. Branches rustled in the wind, and strange noises echoed through the trees. Panic began to creep into my chest as we called out her name, but there was no response. Minutes turned into hours as we combed through the forest, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. I could see the fear in my wife's eyes as she clutched our other children close. Just when we were about to give up hope, we heard Emily's voice faintly calling for help. It sounded like she was deep in the woods, far from where we had been searching. We followed her voice, pushing through thick underbrush and stumbling over roots. The forest seemed to close in around us, and I felt like we were being watched by unseen eyes. Finally, we stumbled into a small clearing, and there was Emily, huddled in a ball, tears streaming down her face. She looked pale and terrified, but otherwise unharmed. She told us that she had been hiding behind a tree when she heard something moving in the bushes nearby. It sounded like footsteps, slow and deliberate, getting closer and closer. That's when she had panicked and run deeper into the woods, losing her sense of direction in the darkness. She said she had been wandering aimlessly for what felt like hours before she heard our voices. We didn't waste any time getting out of there. We grabbed Emily and practically ran back to the campground, not daring to look back. Once we were safely back at our tents, we packed up our things and hightailed it out of there, leaving the campground behind us. To this day, I still don't know what was out there in the woods that night, but I'll never forget the feeling of being hunted. Setting up the tent was a bit of a hassle, but we managed to get it done before the sun went down. The air was cool and the stars were shining bright overhead. It felt peaceful and romantic. We made a fire and roasted marshmallows, reminiscing about our years together. But as the night wore on, I started to feel uneasy. It was like there was something lurking in the shadows, watching us. When we crawled into our sleeping bags and zipped up the tent for the night, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig outside made my heart race. Suddenly, we heard strange noises coming from outside the tent. It sounded like footsteps, slow and deliberate, crunching on the forest floor. My wife gripped my arm, her eyes wide with fear. We held our breath, listening intently as the footsteps drew closer and closer. I wanted to peek outside and see what was out there, but I was too scared to move. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, the footsteps stopped right outside our tent. I could hear someone breathing heavily, their breath fogging up the fabric of the tent. My wife and I huddled together, trying to make ourselves as small as possible. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, drowning out all other sound. Then, without warning, the intruder spoke. Their voice was low and menacing, sending shivers down my spine. They taunted us, telling us they knew we were in there and that there was nowhere for us to hide. They said they had been watching us for hours, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead as I realized we were completely at their mercy. I didn't know what they wanted from us or why they were tormenting us like this. We stayed silent, hoping that if we didn't respond, they would go away. But they just laughed, a cruel sound that echoed through the night. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, they were gone. The footsteps faded into the distance, leaving behind an eerie silence. My wife and I stayed awake the rest of the night, too scared to sleep. Every little sound made us jump, convinced that the intruder had returned to finish what they had started. When morning finally came, we packed up our things and left the campground behind us, vowing never to return. Me and my friends had this idea to go on a boat tour of the lake. We wanted to explore all the hidden coves and waterfalls that you can't see from land. So, we booked a tour with a local guide who claimed to know the lake like the back of his hand. Everything seemed fine at first. We boarded the boat and set off, laughing and joking as we cruised across the water. The sun was shining, and the lake looked peaceful and inviting. But as we ventured further into the lake, things started to feel off. The atmosphere grew tense, like there was something lurking just beneath the surface. Our guide, a grizzled old man with a weathered face, seemed to sense it too. He kept glancing nervously over his shoulder, as if he was expecting something to jump out at us any moment. Then, out of nowhere, he disappeared. 1 minute he was there, steering the boat and regaling us with stories about the lake, and the next minute he was gone. At first, we thought maybe he had fallen overboard or gone to the back of the boat for some reason. But when we searched the entire boat and couldn't find him anywhere, panic started to set in. We were stranded in the middle of the lake with no one to steer the boat or call for help. The water stretched out in all directions, with no land in sight. We tried calling out for our guide, hoping he would hear us and come back. But there was no response, just the sound of the water lapping against the sides of the boat. As the minutes turned into hours, fear began to gnaw at the edges of our minds. We didn't know what had happened to our guide or if he was even still alive. Desperate for some kind of sign, we scanned the horizon for any boats or landmarks that could lead us back to shore. But there was nothing, just endless water stretching out in every direction. Just when we were about to give up hope, we spotted something in the distance. It was a small island, barely visible against the backdrop of the lake. With renewed determination, we steered the boat towards the island, hoping to find some kind of help or shelter. But as we got closer, we realized that the island was deserted, with no signs of life anywhere. We decided to dock the boat and explore the island on foot, hoping to find some clue as to what had happened to our guide. But as we walked deeper into the island, things started to get weird. The trees seemed to close in around us, casting long shadows that danced in the fading light. Strange noises echoed through the air, like whispers carried on the wind. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end as we pressed forward, our footsteps crunching on the forest floor. It was like we were being watched by unseen eyes, lurking just beyond the edge of our vision. Just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, we stumbled upon a clearing in the center of the island. And there, standing in the middle of the clearing, was our guide. He looked completely unharmed, like he hadn't just disappeared into thin air moments ago. He greeted us with a smile, as if nothing had happened at all. But there was something off about his smile, something cold and calculating that sent a shiver down my spine. I could feel the fear creeping back into my chest as I realized that we were not alone on the island. Without a word, we turned and ran back to the boat, our hearts pounding in our chests. We didn't stop until we were safely back on the water, putting as much distance between us and the island as possible. As we sped back towards the shore, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had just narrowly escaped something sinister. And I prayed that we would never have to set foot on that island again. After a messy breakup, I needed some time alone to clear my head. So, I decided to go hiking by the lake, hoping the fresh air and scenic views would help ease my mind. The trail was quiet and peaceful, with only the sounds of birds chirping and leaves rustling in the breeze. I felt a sense of calm wash over me as I wandered deeper into the woods, surrounded by nature's beauty. But as I rounded a bend in the trail, something caught my eye. It was a hidden cabin tucked away in a clearing, almost completely obscured by the dense foliage. Curiosity got the better of me, and I couldn't resist the urge to investigate. As I approached the cabin, a chill ran down my spine. There was something eerie about the place, something that made my skin crawl. Pushing aside the overgrown bushes, I cautiously made my way to the door. It was slightly ajar, as if inviting me inside. With trembling hands, I pushed it open and stepped into the darkness. The air inside the cabin was musty and stale, with a faint odor that made my stomach churn. I could barely see anything in the dim light, but I knew I had stumbled upon something sinister. Scanning the room, my eyes fell upon a gruesome sight. There, in the corner, was a pool of dried blood and a tattered piece of fabric, evidence of a recent murder. Fear gripped me like a vice as I realized I had stumbled upon the lair of a serial killer. My mind raced with thoughts of escape, but I knew I had to stay calm and think things through. Suddenly, I heard a noise outside the cabin, a twig snapping underfoot. My heart skipped a beat as I realized the killer could still be nearby, lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike again. Panic surged through me as I frantically searched for a way out. But the windows were boarded up, and the door was the only exit. With trembling hands, I dialed 911 on my phone and reported what I had found. The operator assured me that help was on the way, but I knew I couldn't wait around for them to arrive. Summoning all my courage, I burst out of the cabin and ran as fast as my legs would carry me. The forest blurred past me in a haze of fear and adrenaline, but I didn't stop until I reached the safety of the trailhead. Breathless and shaking, I collapsed on the ground and waited for the sound of sirens in the distance. It felt like an eternity before help finally arrived, but when it did, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The police conducted a thorough investigation of the cabin and surrounding area, but there was no sign of the killer. It was as if he had vanished into thin air, leaving behind only the chilling evidence of his crimes. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that lingered in the back of my mind. The thought that I had come so close to danger left me shaking to the core, and I knew it would be a long time before I felt safe again. But I also felt a sense of gratitude for having escaped unharmed. It was a stark reminder of the fragility of life and the importance of trusting your instincts when faced with danger. As I moved on from the experience, I vowed to always listen to that voice inside me that warns of danger, no matter how faint it may be. And I hope that by sharing my story, I could help others stay safe in the face of danger. We planned a camping trip by the lake to celebrate the 4th of July as a family. It seemed like the perfect way to enjoy the holiday, surrounded by nature and away from the hustle and bustle of the city. As we set up our campsite near the shore, excitement filled the air. We unpacked our tents and coolers, eager to spend the weekend relaxing and enjoying each other's company. But as the sun began to set and the sky darkened, a sense of unease settled over us. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, like we were being watched from the shadows. Then, in the distance, we saw a group of strangers gathering on the shore. They were dressed in dark robes and carrying torches, their faces obscured by the flickering flames. Curiosity mingled with fear as we watched them perform a sinister ritual, chanting in low, guttural voices. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but the sense of danger hung heavy in the air. Panic gripped me as I realized we were in grave danger. Without a word, I grabbed my family and we silently crept away from the campsite, careful not to draw attention to ourselves. We made our way through the trees, heart pounding in our chests, until we were safely hidden from view. From our hiding spot, we watched as the strangers continued their ritual, oblivious to our escape. Fear gnawed at the edges of my mind as we waited for an opportunity to make a run for it. I prayed that we would make it out of there alive, that we would escape the clutches of whatever sinister force lurked on the shore. Finally, the moment came. The strangers finished their ritual and began to disperse, leaving the shore empty and silent once more. With trembling hands, we made a break for it, running as fast as our legs would carry us through the darkness. Branches scratched at our skin and roots threatened to trip us up, but we didn't stop until we reached the safety of our car. Breathless and shaking, we peeled out of the campground, leaving the strangers and their sinister ritual far behind us. It was a long, tense drive home, but we were grateful to be alive. As we pulled into our driveway, relief washed over me like a tidal wave. We had escaped the danger unscathed, but the memory of that night would haunt me for years to come. It was our anniversary, and my partner and I decided to celebrate with a romantic sunset cruise on the lake. We rented a private boat and set out just before dusk, excited to spend the evening together under the stars. The lake was calm and serene, with the last rays of sunlight casting a warm glow over the water. We clinked our glasses of wine and settled into our seats, enjoying the peacefulness of the moment. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, the atmosphere on the lake began to change. I could feel a sense of unease creeping over me, like we were being watched by unseen eyes. Suddenly, we heard the sharp crack of gunfire echoing across the water. My heart skipped a beat as I glanced around, trying to locate the source of the sound. We crouched low in the boat, hoping whoever was shooting wouldn't notice us. But then, another gunshot rang out, followed by the sound of glass shattering as our wine bottle exploded in a shower of shards. Panic surged through me as I realized we were being targeted. Someone out there was shooting at us, and we were completely exposed on the open water. Without hesitation, I grabbed the oars and started rowing as fast as I could, desperate to get us out of harm's way. My partner huddled beside me, their eyes wide with fear as we raced across the lake. The sound of gunfire seemed to follow us, growing louder and more frantic with each passing moment. I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins as I strained against the oars, my muscles burning with exertion. Every splash of water against the hull sent shivers down my spine, as if the bullets were inches away from piercing the thin metal of the boat. I didn't dare look back, afraid of what I might see lurking in the darkness. But finally, after what felt like an eternity, we reached the safety of the shore. I practically leaped out of the boat and onto solid ground, my legs trembling with exhaustion and relief. My partner and I collapsed onto the ground, gasping for breath as we tried to process what had just happened. The adrenaline was still coursing through my veins, making it hard to think straight. As we caught our breath, we realized just how lucky we had been to escape unharmed. Whoever had been shooting at us had meant business, and if we hadn't acted quickly, things could have ended much differently. Shaken but grateful, we made our way back to the rental office, where we reported the incident to the authorities. They promised to investigate, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that lingered in the pit of my stomach. Even now, weeks later, I can still hear the echoes of gunfire in my nightmares, a chilling reminder of just how close we had come to tragedy. But I'm thankful that we made it out alive, and I'll never forget the terror of that night on the lake. I live alone in a cozy lake house, tucked away from the hustle and bustle of the city. It's peaceful here, especially at night when the only sounds are the gentle lapping of the water against the shore. One night, I was startled awake by a knock on the door. Glancing at the clock, I saw it was just past 2 a.m. I wondered who could possibly be out here at this hour, but I got up to answer the door, assuming it was just a late-night visitor who had lost their way. When I swung open the door, there was no one there. I peered into the darkness, but the porch was empty, illuminated only by the soft glow of the porch light. Confused, I shrugged it off and closed the door, chalking it up to my imagination playing tricks on me. But as I made my way back to bed, a feeling of unease settled over me. Suddenly, I heard a noise coming from downstairs. It sounded like footsteps, slow and deliberate, echoing through the silent house. Panic surged through me as I realized I wasn't alone. Someone was in the house with me, lurking in the shadows, watching my every move. Without thinking, I bolted for the door, desperate to escape before it was too late. But as I reached the front door, I froze in terror. Standing in the doorway was a figure, shrouded in darkness, their eyes gleaming with malice. I could feel the blood drain from my face as I realized I was trapped, with nowhere to run and no one to help me. Frantically, I turned and sprinted towards my neighbor's house, just down the lake. I could hear the sound of my own footsteps pounding against the pavement, but it felt like I was running in slow motion, as if the darkness was swallowing me whole. With every step, I could feel the presence of someone behind me, lurking just out of sight. I didn't dare look back, afraid of what I might see lurking in the darkness. Finally, I reached my neighbor's house and pounded on the door, praying they would hear me and come to my rescue. It felt like an eternity before they opened the door, their eyes wide with surprise and concern. I barely had time to explain before I collapsed into their arms, shaking with fear and exhaustion. They called the police immediately, and within minutes, officers arrived on the scene, searching the area for the intruder. After a tense search, they found him hiding in the bushes near my house, lurking like a predator waiting to strike. He was arrested and taken into custody, but the terror of that night would stay with me forever. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of knowing that someone had violated the sanctity of my home. But I refused to let fear control me, determined to reclaim my sense of safety and security. I agreed to pose for a photographer at the lake for a portfolio shoot. It seemed like a great opportunity to build my modeling portfolio and get some stunning shots in a natural setting. The photographer, a man in his 40s with a friendly smile, seemed professional and experienced. He had all the right equipment and knew exactly what shots he wanted to capture. At first, everything seemed normal. We started off with some basic poses near the water, the sunlight casting a warm glow over the scene. I felt relaxed and confident, enjoying the experience of being in front of the camera. But as the day progressed, things started to take a dark turn. The photographer began making suggestive comments, complimenting my appearance in a way that made me uncomfortable. I brushed it off at first, thinking maybe he was just trying to be friendly. But as the comments grew more frequent and more explicit, I began to feel uneasy. I tried to steer the conversation back to the shoot, but the photographer seemed determined to push the boundaries. He started asking personal questions, probing into my private life in a way that felt invasive. I could feel a knot forming in my stomach as I realized that the photographer's intentions were far more sinister than I had initially thought. It was like a switch had been flipped, and suddenly I was filled with a sense of dread. But I didn't know what to do. I was alone with this man in the middle of nowhere, with no one around to help me if things went south. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the lake, the photographer's behavior grew even more aggressive. He started touching me without my consent, his hands lingering in places they didn't belong. I tried to push him away, but he was stronger than me, pinning me down with a force that left me gasping for air. Panic surged through me as I realized I was in serious danger. Desperate for escape, I managed to break free from his grasp and bolted towards the edge of the lake. My heart was pounding in my chest, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps as I ran as fast as I could. But just as I reached the safety of the shoreline, I heard the sound of footsteps behind me. I glanced over my shoulder and saw the photographer chasing after me, his face contorted with rage. Fear gripped me like a vice as I realized there was nowhere left to run. I was trapped, with nowhere to turn and no one to help me. But then, out of nowhere, I heard a voice calling out to me from the darkness. It was a fisherman who had been nearby, drawn by the commotion. I screamed for help, my voice raw with terror as the fisherman rushed to my aid. Together, we managed to overpower the photographer and restrain him until the police arrived. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling of horror that lingered in the aftermath of the encounter. The thought of what could have happened if the fisherman hadn't been there to save me haunted my nightmares. But I was grateful to be alive, and determined to never let myself be put in such a vulnerable position again. Being a park ranger at the lake had its perks, but it also meant dealing with troublemakers from time to time. It was my job to patrol the area and keep an eye out for any signs of trouble, which is exactly what I was doing one evening. As I made my rounds, I stumbled upon an abandoned campsite tucked away in a remote corner of the lake. At first, I thought nothing of it. People often left their campsites in a hurry, especially if they were inexperienced campers. But as I got closer, I noticed something strange. There were signs of a struggle, ripped tent fabric, scattered belongings, and what looked like bloodstains on the ground. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized I had stumbled upon something far more sinister than I ever imagined. Someone had been attacked here, and they were likely in serious danger. I radioed for backup and began searching the area for any signs of the victim or the attacker. Every rustle of leaves and snap of a twig set my nerves on edge, as if someone or something was watching me from the shadows. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I spotted movement in the trees. I spun around, my hand instinctively reaching for the stun gun at my hip, but there was nothing there, just the sound of the wind rustling through the leaves. I shook off the feeling of unease and pressed on, determined to find whoever was responsible for the attack. But the deeper I ventured into the woods, the more the darkness seemed to close in around me, suffocating me with its oppressive weight. Suddenly, I heard a noise coming from up ahead, a low, guttural growl that sent shivers down my spine. I froze in terror, my heart pounding in my chest as I strained to listen for any sign of movement. But all I heard was silence, broken only by the sound of my own ragged breaths. I knew I had to keep moving, but every fiber of my being screamed at me to turn and run, to get as far away from here as possible. Summoning all my courage, I pressed on, my senses on high alert as I searched for any sign of the victim or the attacker. But the deeper I ventured into the woods, the more I began to doubt myself. Was I really prepared to face whatever horrors awaited me in the darkness? Then, just when I was about to give up hope, I stumbled upon a clearing in the woods. And there, lying on the ground, was the victim of the attack, battered and bruised, but alive. Relief washed over me as I rushed to their side, offering what little comfort I could. They were in bad shape, but they would survive, and that's all that mattered. But as I helped the victim to their feet, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I scanned the trees for any sign of movement, but there was nothing, just the sound of the wind whispering through the leaves. With a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, I realized that whoever had attacked the victim was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike again. I knew I had to get the victim to safety, but every instinct in my body told me that we weren't alone in the woods. And as I led them back towards the safety of the park ranger station, I couldn't shake the feeling that the true horror was only just beginning. I managed to get help and get the victim out of there, but they was never caught. Alright, so I was a college student looking to make some extra cash over the summer. I saw this job posting for a boat rental attendant at the lake nearby, so I thought, why not? Seemed like a chill gig, you know? First day on the job, everything seemed pretty normal. My manager, let's call him Mr. Smith, showed me around the boat shack, gave me the keys, all that stuff. Seemed like a decent guy, a bit quiet maybe, but nothing too out of the ordinary. But as the days went by, things started to get weird. Mr. Smith would linger around the boat shack long after he was supposed to leave, just watching me with this creepy intensity. Made me feel super uncomfortable, like I was being watched all the time. And then there were the little things. Like, I'd come in the morning and find the boats moved around or the equipment messed with, even though I was the only one with keys to the shack. I figured maybe it was just Mr. Smith being forgetful or something, but it still gave me the creeps. One night, I was closing up the shack, getting ready to head home, when Mr. Smith showed up out of nowhere. He had this weird look in his eyes, like he was sizing me up or something. I tried to brush it off and make some small talk, but he just kept staring at me in silence. Then, out of nowhere, he starts asking all these personal questions. Like, where I live, if I have a boyfriend, stuff like that. I tried to laugh it off and change the subject, but he just kept pushing and pushing until I felt really uncomfortable. I made some excuse about needing to lock up and get home, but he just stood there, blocking the door, like he didn't want me to leave. I remember feeling this knot of fear in my stomach, like something wasn't right. Eventually, I managed to slip past him and get out of there, but the whole encounter left me shaken. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously off about Mr. Smith, like he wasn't who he said he was. After that night, I started noticing Mr. Smith hanging around the boat shack more and more, even when he wasn't scheduled to be there. It was like he was always watching, waiting for me to slip up or something. I tried talking to some of my coworkers about it, but they just brushed it off and said I was being paranoid. But I knew deep down that something wasn't right about Mr. Smith, and I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that hung over me whenever he was around. Then, one night, things finally came to a head. I was closing up the shack, just like any other night, when Mr. Smith showed up again, out of nowhere. Only this time, he didn't bother with the small talk. Instead, he just lunged at me, grabbing me by the arms and pinning me against the wall. I remember screaming for help, but it was like no one could hear me. I was trapped, completely at his mercy. He had this crazed look in his eyes, like he was possessed or something. And then he started talking, but it wasn't like anything I'd ever heard before. It was like he was speaking in tongues or something, this guttural, primal language that sent shivers down my spine. I tried to fight back, but he was too strong. It was like he was fueled by some unholy strength, like he wasn't even human anymore. I remember thinking that I was going to die, right there in that dingy little boat shack. But then, just as suddenly as it had started, it was over. Mr. Smith let go of me and stumbled back, like he was coming out of some sort of trance. He looked at me with this mix of horror and confusion, like he didn't even recognize me. I didn't stick around to find out what was going on. I just grabbed my stuff and ran, not stopping until I was miles away from that lake. I never went back, never saw Mr. Smith again. To this day, I still don't know what happened that night. All I know is that something evil lurked beneath the surface of that lake, something that I never want to encounter again. I rented a cabin for spring break, looking forward to a peaceful getaway from the stresses of school. The cabin was nestled in a secluded spot by the lake, surrounded by towering trees and breathtaking views. At first, everything seemed perfect. The weather was warm, the birds were singing, and the lake sparkled in the sunlight. But as the days passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I started noticing strange movements across the lake, like someone was watching me from a distance. At first, I brushed it off as my imagination, but the feeling persisted, growing stronger with each passing day. Then, one evening as I was sitting on the porch, I caught a glimpse of something glinting in the sunlight from across the lake. Curiosity piqued, I grabbed a pair of binoculars and trained them on the source of the glint. What I saw made my blood run cold. There, in the window of the cabin across the lake, was a man, my neighbor, staring back at me through high-powered binoculars. Fear gripped me as I realized he had been secretly watching me every move. I felt violated, as if my privacy had been stripped away without my consent. But I couldn't confront him. I was alone in a remote cabin with no one around for miles. I didn't know what he was capable of, or what he might do if he knew I had caught him in the act. Instead, I resolved to keep a low profile and avoid drawing any attention to myself. But the more I tried to ignore it, the more the feeling of being watched intensified. I started noticing strange noises outside the cabin at night, footsteps crunching on the gravel path, branches snapping in the darkness. Every sound sent shivers down my spine, as if someone or something was lurking just beyond the edge of my vision. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was in danger, that my neighbor's obsession with me was spiraling out of control. Desperate for answers, I decided to investigate. I waited until nightfall, when the cover of darkness would conceal my movements, and set out across the lake towards my neighbor's cabin. As I approached, I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. The cabin loomed in the darkness, silent and foreboding, like a predator waiting to strike. Summoning all my courage, I crept closer, my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear my own breath echoing in the stillness, loud and ragged in the quiet of the night. Then, suddenly, I heard a noise coming from inside the cabin, the sound of footsteps pacing back and forth, accompanied by a low, guttural muttering. Panic surged through me as I realized my neighbor was inside, just a few feet away from me. I wanted to turn and run, to get as far away from here as possible, but I knew I had to press on. With trembling hands, I reached out and pushed open the door, my heart pounding in my chest. What I saw inside made my blood run cold. There, in the center of the room, surrounded by walls covered in photographs of me, was my neighbor, his eyes wild with obsession, his face contorted with madness. I felt like I had stumbled into a nightmare, trapped in a twisted reality where nothing was as it seemed. I knew I had to get out of here, to escape before it was too late. But as I turned to flee, I heard the sound of footsteps behind me, heavy, lumbering footsteps that sent a chill down my spine. I glanced over my shoulder and saw my neighbor standing in the doorway, blocking my only escape route. Fear gripped me as I realized I was trapped, with nowhere left to run. I could feel his eyes boring into me, his gaze filled with a madness that sent shivers down my spine. But then, just when it seemed like all hope was lost, I heard the sound of approaching sirens in the distance. Help was on the way, and I knew I had to hold on just a little while longer. With a surge of adrenaline, I lunged past my neighbor and bolted out the door, running as fast as my legs would carry me. I could hear him shouting behind me, his voice filled with rage and desperation, but I didn't dare look back. I ran until I reached the safety of my cabin, where I collapsed on the floor, gasping for breath. It was over. I had escaped the clutches of my deranged neighbor, but the terror of that night would stay with me forever. As the police arrived and took my neighbor into custody, I couldn't shake the feeling of horror that lingered in the aftermath of the encounter. The thought that someone had been watching me, plotting and scheming from the shadows, sent shivers down my spine. Our high school reunion brought us back to the lake where we used to spend our summers. It felt nostalgic being back in this familiar setting, surrounded by the shimmering water and towering trees. As we gathered around the campfire, reminiscing about old times, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. There was a tension in the air, a sense of unease that hung over us like a dark cloud. As the night wore on and the fire crackled in the darkness, old secrets began to surface. Stories that had long been buried came bubbling to the surface, threatening to tear our friendships apart. I listened as my friends confessed their deepest regrets and darkest desires, their voices trembling with emotion. It was like peeling back layers of a long-forgotten mystery, revealing the truth hidden beneath the surface. But as the night grew darker and the stories grew more intense, I realized that some secrets were meant to stay buried. There was a darkness lurking within each of us, a shadow that threatened to consume us if we let it. Suddenly, one of my friends blurted out a confession that sent shockwaves through the group. It was a secret so dark and twisted that I could hardly believe my ears. As the truth sank in, the atmosphere around the campfire grew heavy with tension. I could feel the weight of our secrets pressing down on us, threatening to suffocate us in their darkness. But just as I thought things couldn't get any worse, a figure emerged from the shadows, their face obscured by the darkness. My heart leaped into my throat as I realized that we were now alone. The figure spoke in a voice that sent chills down my spine, revealing a truth so horrifying that it shattered the illusion of our idyllic reunion. We had stumbled upon something far more sinister than we ever imagined, and now we were all in grave danger. Panic surged through me as I scrambled to my feet, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew we had to get out of here before it was too late, before whatever darkness lurked in the shadows consumed us all. But as I turned to run, I realized that the figure was blocking our path, their eyes gleaming with malice. We were trapped, with no way out and no one to help us. Desperate for escape, I lunged towards the figure, hoping to overpower them and break free from their grasp. But they were too strong, too powerful, and I was no match for their darkness. I managed to escape with one last mite of strength. I got out of there as quick as I could. Even to this day, I still have nightmares of what unfolded on that lake. As a police officer, it's my duty to uphold the law and protect the community. So, when we received a call about a missing person near the lake, my team and I immediately sprang into action. We combed the area, searching every inch of the lake and its surroundings for any sign of the missing individual. The sun beat down relentlessly as we trudged through the dense underbrush, our hearts heavy with the weight of our mission. Hours turned into days as we continued our search, refusing to give up hope even as the odds seemed stacked against us. But with each passing moment, the sense of urgency grew, as did the fear that we might never find the missing person alive. Then, just when we were about to lose hope, we stumbled upon a grisly discovery: the body of the missing person, hidden among the trees near the edge of the lake. It was a grim reminder of the dangers lurking in the shadows, and the darkness that lay hidden beneath the surface. As we examined the scene, we realized that this was no ordinary case of a missing person. There were signs of foul play, bruising around the neck, defensive wounds on the arms, and a look of terror frozen on the victim's face. It was clear that we were dealing with a serial killer, someone who had been preying on unsuspecting victims for far too long. The realization sent a chill down my spine as I realized the magnitude of the task that lay ahead of us. But as we delved deeper into the investigation, we began to uncover a web of lies and deceit that stretched far beyond the shores of the lake. There were secrets lurking in every shadow, waiting to be uncovered. And then, just when we thought we were getting closer to the truth, I started receiving threats. They came in the form of anonymous letters and late-night phone calls, warning me to back off or face the consequences. But I refused to be intimidated. I knew that we were onto something big, something that could bring a dangerous killer to justice and bring closure to the families of the victims. Then, one day, we got a break in the case. A witness came forward with crucial information that led us straight to the killer's doorstep. We raided his home, guns drawn and hearts pounding, ready to apprehend him once and for all. And there he was, standing in the doorway with a look of defiance on his face. But we were ready for him, and we took him into custody without a fight. As we led him away in handcuffs, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. We had done it. We had brought a killer to justice and put an end to his reign of terror. But as I looked into the eyes of the man who had caused so much pain and suffering, I couldn't help but wonder what drove him to commit such heinous acts. What darkness lurked within his soul, and what demons had driven him to kill? But those were questions for another day. For now, all that mattered was that justice had been served, and the families of the victims could finally find peace.